Recording. It's recording. Cool. Oh, wait, I have to share my screen.
Did you do your master's?
I got my master's, yeah. So I got my master's in education, more specifically as like a focus on like leadership, student affairs.
Did you do it here?
Minnesota.
Okay. I thought you did that here. That'd be the equivalent of our education leadership. Well, now it's higher administration. Use the name.
Oh. As your supervisor.
Are we having a meeting today?
Well, I'll be able to check. Anyway,
Standing right here, fine, or should I stand somewhere else?
You're in the front,
Okay.
just anywhere in front of the TV.
Here?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I don't want to block that, but I guess if you're recording it.
We're recording it,
Okay,
the screen.
so just to introduce myself for those that might not know, I'm Matt. I'm the director of grad student services. Basically what that has me doing is what it's supposed to be doing is overseeing the GSA, which is the Grad Student Association. So it's a grad student government, but I do other things among that. Our department's just very small, so there's a lot of roles to fill. So the typical question we always get is why graduate school? And so these are a lot of characteristics that we see about why you'd want to pursue graduate school. Mainly a lot of the ones that students are always like, oh, I get more money. That would depend first. In most cases, you do get more. You earn more over your lifetime. So you're not going to get like if you get a PhD or master's, like you're not going to get like 50,000 more on your salary. Like all of a sudden, like that's not the way it's going to work in most cases. Depends what degree it is. Engineering might make a huge difference. So the graduate school, our department at least doesn't handle professional degrees. It only handles doctoral programs and master's programs. So med school is a different thing from us. And then we, of course, we don't have law school or any of those other professional degrees schools. So of course, earning money is always the biggest one that people want to do it. And career advancement is another big one, which of course leads to earning more money theoretically, not just getting paid the same amount for doing more. And it also does open up more doors for you to look into other career opportunities, especially depending on where you want to go. So that's where the career change comes in, because some people just go to grad school after doing their undergrad and going into the field, and then they like, I don't want to do this anymore. So then they go to grad school instead of trying to get another bachelor's degree, try to figure out what they want to do and go into more of a specialized field. That's kind of what I did. And then of course you develop more of an expertise, depending on which degrees you're going to go to, like the master's and doctoral. It's different for both. You will conduct research in both of them, more so in the doctoral program. That's kind of where that focus is. And then, of course, you produce knowledge. By that, we mean either like you're going to be writing a thesis or dissertation or working on some projects. So you're going to create something that you use for your future or whoever you're working for. Questions about that? So the other question we always get is what the difference between master's and doctoral degrees are. So in this case, we put PhDs, but in reality, it's a lot of doctoral degrees. One thing to note is we do have a terminal degree. So PhDs, doctoral degrees are considered terminal degrees, like the last three you can get basically. Of course, you can get multiple PhDs if you want to go down that route, or if you want to get a PhD, MD together, you can do that too. There's people that do that. But in regards to arts, they have a master's in fine arts, and so that's considered a terminal degree in their field. So they don't have a PhD program in that field. It's called an MFA. So that a lot of professors in those fields will have MFAs versus like a PhD. You'll see PhDs too, in English, those types of things. So just to brush that part out. So how they differ though is it's going to vary dependent amongst the programs. Each field is very different from others. Like I was saying that fine arts has the MFA type of thing. The master's degrees are usually 2 to 3 years. PhDs can be, I think it says 4 to 7, but we wrote 4 to 6 because that's typically more correct than the 4 to 7. Don't let the 7 scare you. Some people can take longer. It just depends on your field. Some can also do it shorter. I did my PhD in 3.5. So that's because I was also able to transfer credits in for my master's. So you can, that's an option as well. So keeping that in mind. There's also more so with masters, it's more course oriented. So you're going to be taking more courses than you would be in your PhD program. your PhD program is going to have a lot more research components. So they're like, especially for like dissertations, you have to take credits in dissertations, and most of that's from that. There's no course, no classes that you'd actually be going to. You're just working on your research. So that's where that one's going to be coming in more into play. So I would say the PhD is usually more independent amongst you, especially when you get to the candidacy level. So when you get to a PhD candidate, that's when you've passed your comprehensive exam. Basically, all that is left for you to do is your dissertation or your research. You finish all the coursework that was required in the PhD. So now you're a candidate. So if you've heard that term before, doctoral candidate, that's where that's from. When you get to that stage, it's more just on you and how long you want to take type of thing. Do all your research. The master's program is also a little bit more specialized in regards to training because you're doing more coursework, and so it's going to be more narrow in that regard. PhD, you get a little bit more flexibility because depending on your research, you get to research what you want more so on your topic, that type of thing. And of course, there is usually more opportunities for funding with doctoral programs than master's programs. Master's programs typically don't have as much funding opportunities just because more people want doctoral students because doctoral students are here longer, and so they can give more funding to those students. But there are programs and things like that that master's programs can still apply for in those regards. One thing that's always a misconception between the two is that you need a master's degree to get a PhD degree or doctoral degree. No, you can go straight into the PhD doctoral program. You don't need the master's. Some of our programs, at least on our campus, can have you earn the master's on the way, even though you didn't apply for a master's program, like social psychology. That one's an example. You can go into the doctoral program and then earn the master's on the way. You'll get both degrees once you're done, type of thing. But it's not required. A lot of STEM fields typically don't require some sort of master's to get onto their doctoral program. For us, the only one that comes off the top of my head would be the counseling program, the counseling PhD program. That one would require you to have a master's in counseling before you get into the PhD. And that's more not their requirement, it's more of that accreditation from their governing board that requires that. So that would be one example of that. But in most cases, you don't need a master's. So it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. Personally, for me, the master's helped me get ready for grad school before I went on to the PhD. So it's kind of it was a good transition for me to do that. Especially it helped me figure out if I wanted to dedicate my time to a PhD. Because it is a longer time frame, as you can see. So that type of thing. So you don't need to do that as much. But it's just something to think about. If you don't want to go to the master's program, you can go straight to This just gives you a quick breakdown. We use mechanical engineering. Yeah, why we use this as an example, but as you can see, the master's is only 30 credits, and there's two plans. There's a thesis and non-thesis. So typically, the non-thesis option always gives a project. Usually, you have to do some sort of project at the end in regards to that, and that's typically what you'll do in place of your thesis. And it's only 30 credits of those same. So as you can see, most of it's coursework, with 6 credits being the thesis option. And then for the PhD version, 60 credits. And then you can see 40 coursework and 20 dissertations. That's a lot more on trying to figure out your dissertation and work on that. And then you do have to do a qualifying exam, the comprehensive exam, and then ultimately your dissertation defense. That's the big one. That's the one you'll need to pass in order to get the degree itself. Not as scary as it sounds. You'll get through it. You decided to go that route. Any questions about that? So these are our admissions requirements. If you're going to grad school somewhere else, you might want to look into what their admissions requirements are going to be. So for our master's programs, we have a 2.75. That's what you need as your cumulative GPA to get into a program. That's the minimum. However, there's going to be some of our grad programs that require higher than that. That might require a 3. Typically, it's somewhere in the engineering field that require the higher ones. And then doctoral, it's a 3.0 as well. So if you want to go into those fields, making sure that your GPA is in that realm. Let's say you're someone who's not in that realm, but you're close to it. You can always talk to the program themselves, and then they can write an exception for that. It just depends on if they see you, or if they want you to come work with them, and so they will advocate for you if you need to, type of thing. So don't let the GPA scare you. The other thing you can use, of course, you can take classes, and that way you can raise your GPA back up if it is a lower GPA. And The one thing we do have here that's kind of unique is we have a term called graduate special. What that allows you to do, it allows you to take graduate courses. You're not technically in any program, you have to apply. Everyone that applies usually gets in with that. It allows you to take graduate courses, and then you can use those later on to transfer into once you go and apply to a program. So you can transfer up to a certain amount, but what it allows you to do is, like, let's say you're in between, say you can't decide between social work, and who knows, business, the MBA program. You can take a class from each, like a semester, and then you get like, oh, I don't like this social work one more. So I'm going to go into the social work program. So you can do something like that. You can apply to the social work program to be ready for the next semester, and then you can transfer those courses if they apply. The business one could apply, it has a little bit more flexibility, but if not, then at least you got your, basically allows you to sample before you dive into it if you want to do that route. But there isn't really any funding for that option. So like if you want to get scholarships, usually there's not scholarships offered because you're not enrolled in a program full time. You're just technically just kind of sampling there type of thing. So it allows you to do that. So that's an option for students that are just thinking about grad school that we have. They would have to apply, and it's a $6 fee. And then once you apply, then you can start enrolling in courses, as long as they're not like upper level ones that don't take sort of prerequisites before you apply into it. The online application is the thing you'd have to fill out in our program. With that online application, so the way it works for the grad schools, you fill out that online application through us at the grad school. That's where you'll upload all your documents. So typically, a lot of the normal documents that you see, or the typical documents for each program, are going to be like a resume, CV, either one of those, a combination. Personal statement or statement of purpose. It depends how the program decides to write it or what they want from that. Your transcripts. So your transcripts will need the official ones transferred to us. But you can upload unofficial ones in the meantime, because let's say you're an undergrad graduating, you're applying for the following fall semester, you're not going to have your official final transcript because you're still in the middle of your semester. So you can upload your unofficial one so they can see that document. But if you're admitted, you'll need to send your official ones to make sure that way we have that record, because they won't admit you until we get the official ones. So you basically be an admit pending type of situation. So those are the typical things. GRE or GMAT, those are the standardized tests that you have to take for grad school. It's the equivalent of SAT or ACT if you took for undergrad. Those depend on the program. Each program, so the grad school itself doesn't have a rule saying that every program has to have a GRE requirement. My personal opinion is that just get rid of the whole thing. That's my personal opinion, but you can exit that. I don't care. But the GRE it's open. The grad school has the policy where we leave it open to each program to decide. So a lot of programs did either get rid of it or have it as optional when COVID hit, just because there were so many issues with taking that test during COVID time. ETS, the one that administers the test, had an at-home version, and it was just didn't work that well. And so like people were getting signed off while they're in the middle of the test and then get time back. And so it was just a mess. So some programs took that into consideration, just got rid of the requirement. But even now we have some that have gotten rid of it. Mainly in the master's category. Some of our doctoral ones have gotten rid of it, but mostly in our master's category, that's where a lot of it you won't see that requirement. It's either now going to be not required, optional, suggested, or recommended is what they use, and then the other one would be that it is required. My advice is usually when it comes to suggested or optional, depending on how, let's say you're a student whose GPA is not the greatest. Let's say you think you can do well on the GRE, then that's probably where you want to take it. Kind of offset the rest of your application. But if you don't, your GPA is like the greatest and everything else you have in your applications, like top, if you're a top A student and whatnot, then you probably don't need to take that. It's GRE scores. Because it's like it's a little over $200 for the test. When you take it once, take it multiple times if you needed to. There is a voucher that you can apply through ETS if you qualify that will give you like a voucher for like half off. And that you just Google it and it'll show up, and I forgot what the eligibility criteria is, but it usually has to do with like low income situations. So that's something you can apply for. The GMAT's just this, essentially it's the College of Business equivalent of the GRE. So that's typically College of Businesses are the ones that require the GMAT, but more programs have been taking either or. Same thing with the MCAT. Some programs will take the MCAT, which is the med school version. The only one we don't take is the LSAT. That's the law school version. We don't have a law school, so we can't even get those scores. So there was issues in the past where some programs were saying that they take the LSAT. You can't do that. But the MCAT we can take, but you just have to pay attention to whatever the program's asking for. In those situations, and then the last thing is, of course, letters of recommendation. Typically, most will require 3. Might be some that have 2, and I think there's one that has 4. But the letters of recommendation through our online portal. So what will happen is you'll type in their information, their email, and then once you do all that, send them a link, and then they fill it out, or they submit whatever they need to submit. So that's how that works. So make sure you do ask whoever is going to be writing these letters ahead of time, and they get surprised and like, what is it? The other thing that could happen is because it's coming from like a random email, it could go to their spam folder. So you want to make sure that they're aware of that, so they write the letter for you. Of the situation. Any questions about those? Yeah.
So we'll be honest, like we've had students come in here when they're thinking about going to graduate school and they say, you know, I noticed that I need to submit either a resume or a CV. From your perspective, what would be the better document to submit if they have the option?
So that depends on the student usually, because the CV is directed more towards research. That's theoretically probably the one that they would want to submit more so. But the problem is if there's a student that doesn't have any of that or doesn't have a whole lot of experience within research, like presenting at conferences, that's typically where the CV will get filled. It looks a little bland because there's not much going on, but if it's it, so that's probably where you can just go through a resume. I think it's very dependent on the student. Yeah.
So like if we recommend a resume and they're like, okay, I put my Starbucks job on here or like my fast food job, you know, like, is that what they're putting on there or?
Most students will, but you would only really want to put, similar to how you're applying the jobs, you want to put what's related to what it is you're applying to. So depending on whatever field you're applying to, like, for example, like, if you're applying to some sort of education degree, like you can put working for nonprofits on that thing. But like maybe an engineering job or something, but you're applying to education, like it might not work the same way. But I mean, it's up to the person if they really want to stick that in there, but I would try to go with whatever that related to. Actually, same thing with your letters of recommendation. So we always get asked that question too, like who should they pick for letters of recommendation? Typically, they want to see who your work ethic in regards to academics. So if you have professors that you kept in contact with or that you're working with, like those would be ideal people that have letters of recommendation for you. They all don't have to be academic. So let's say, for example, going back to the teacher example, someone who's a teacher applying for an education graduate program, their principal theoretically could write one for them because it's still related to the work, but it's not in like academic setting. It's more in their work environment. Or same thing if they're going into biology, but maybe they work at like a Charles River in a lab, so their supervisor in that lab could write one for them. And at the same, as long as it's related, it should be fine. Any other questions?
Yeah. How soon would you recommend students to ask for a letter of recommendation?
As soon as they know that they're going to apply to grad school, so that way they can just let them know and then send reminders, of course, because depending on your type, they might forget. Type of thing. I mean, I'd probably forget. Type of thing. So yeah, but I think as soon as they know when they're going to apply to grad school, when they're thinking about it. Any other questions? I had something else about this one too, and I forgot. No, but that's another one. So with those ones, sometimes what will happen is the application will tell you like what they're looking for in this. In most cases, they really just want to know more about you, what you want to research, who do you want to work with if there's someone that you've identified, but that's another key aspect. The grad school is a little different in regards to you don't have an academic advisor like you do in undergrad. Like there's academic advisors in undergrad, like you just go to this person and they tell you which classes to take and you're on your way. Grad school is a little different. Your advisor is going to be a professor. Your advisor would be someone who's doing research, and that's who you'd be working with. At the master's level, you'll also have a master's committee that's made up of that same individual. That's the chair of your committee. And then there's two other individuals that will help you along the way. And so they like review your work and then make sure that you're doing well. At the doctoral level, that group can go up to 5 people. There's a minimum of 5 that serve on your doctoral committee. And that's made up of faculty again. And those are the ones you actually defend your dissertation to and your qualifying exams, like those types of things. But your chair is the more important one because they're the ones that are going to advise you on. They would advise you on classes to take as well, but they're also going to be the ones to help steer you in the direction of where you're researching. So that's where that's going to come into play. So keeping that in mind, what we tell students is when you're looking at grad school, look at, especially like our website, you go to like department websites that has all the faculty and what they're researching. You want to try to identify like who you want to work with, because the research will be like, I don't know, maybe you're interested in frogs. And so someone's working with frogs, and so like, I want to work with that person. The other thing we do suggest is you contact those faculty ahead of time, like get to know the faculty in the department you're applying to. This way, because what happens is when we get the application, your grad school, so let's say it's completed. Your grad school application is done with us. We send it off to the program that you're applying to. They're the ones that review and decide to either admit you or not. So the ones that are deciding this are the faculty in that program. It's usually it's not all the faculty in that program, depending on how big the program is. But it's usually like a small group of them. So if they remember you, when you've talked with them, you're like, oh, I remember this student. Like, I want to work with a student. I'm more likely to get it. And just get building your network there. So we do suggest that you do that ahead of time, even if ones that you see that you're probably not going to work with, but they're in the same department, it's still not a bad idea to try to connect with them, especially now through Zoom. It's a lot easier to do that. So with that, that's what I would suggest on that in that regard. For the personal statement, so like I was saying, that I want to know who you want to work with. If you don't have anyone that you want to work with specifically, then that's not a big deal. But at least writing what research you want to do, what do you eventually want to get out of the program, what do you want to do when you ultimately finish the program. And then you can also use the time to explain anything in your resume or CV that looks odd. Maybe your GPA wasn't the greatest, so that's something you can also explain what happened with your GPA if like something happened. Things like that. It gives you the opportunity to explain more about yourself. And typically, you don't want this to be more than 2 pages because these individuals are having to read so many applications, they're not going to read them. So you don't want to go past that 2-page mark. It's kind of like a cover letter in regards to grad school. Any questions? The other question we get is about paying for graduate school. So there's different options. I won't go into all these very much, but for a couple. Graduate assistantships, I'll talk a little bit more about. Fellowships is a big one that we try to advertise, but they're harder to get. So essentially what a fellowship is, you would have to apply. Let's say, for example, NSF has a big one called the GRFP, the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. That one gives you funding for 3 years. You basically get the equivalent of that's 134,000 over the 3 years. You get, so ideally is what happens, your tuition is covered. You're basically being paid to go to school. And that's something that we try to recommend a lot of students apply for. Because fellowship is ultimate. If you ever have the option between the fellowship and the assistantship, go with the fellowship. Just because the fellowship gives you more freedom. You're not actually having to work, you're just going to school type of thing. And then you can also carry your fellowship around in most cases with you. Like if you decide to go to another institution or get somewhere else, you don't have to, you're not abided by that institution you're at. So that's something like keep in mind. And usually it was select the NSF one I mentioned. It's like a 5-page application. They just want like your resume, CV, the research statement. So it's basically talking about like what research you want to do. And then there's like a broader impacts statement. So that's kind of like, what is this going to do for the overall community or country type of thing. So that's just one example. There's other fellowships. That one's more STEM focused, but if you're not in STEM, there's some other ones that you can look into. Those are a little harder to find, but they do get pretty competitive. Like the NSF one only has like a 15% acceptance rate, but last year and this year we've gotten like students that have applied, and we have more than 10 between the 2 years. So that's one example. Scholarships and grants, of course, are still available to grad students. you are familiar with FAFSA, don't get that in grad school. So like the Pell Grant, that's not something available to grad students. What FAFSA will give you is loans or loan options. We still recommend that you do your FAFSA because it makes you eligible for other scholarships. Like the university has its own scholarships, and so if you don't do FAFSA, you're not gonna be eligible for those things. If you can't do FAFSA because you're not, either you're an international student or undocumented or have DACA, then you can do the institution methodology that we have on campus. And that's a substitute for FAFSA. Either way, you'd have to do it. The deadline, or you can start doing that as of October 1st, and then the deadline is February 15th. And then loans, of course, you don't want those. So talk about those ones. And employers, the other one we always suggest. Employers, like if you're working full-time somewhere, they always have that tuition reimbursement in some cases. So if they do have that, advantage of that. Work on campus here, there is that option. Full-time. So graduate assistantships, essentially what those are, I've always liked to call them student worker jobs, but on steroids. They give you more benefits. We have 3 types on our campus. There's the research assistant, teaching, and then there's the project assistant. You might have heard the term TA in courses. That's what this person is. RA is the other one technically, and then GPA is the last one. I haven't heard the GPA one because that's not the term that we use, but the campus doesn't use. But basically what happens, the only thing that changes between these, the benefits do not change between the 3. The job roles is what changes. So RAs are typically more in labs, doing research in labs, helping write reports, those types of things. TAs, typically helping teach a course, grading, teaching their own course, that type of thing. And then the project assistants more doing administrative duties. So that one would, I know you'll have one technically here. And so that one would be technically considered a project assistant in this regard. That's kind of what that one is. The benefits, so this is by overall means, this is probably the one funding source that a lot of grad students depend on to get their grad school funded. This is where a lot of grad students use to help pay for their grad school. So you get a monthly stipend. This will vary depending on the program you're in and what degree you're seeking. So masters have a minimum of $1,600 if you get a month. If you're at a doctoral level, your minimum will start at $1,900 up to $2,000. So $1,900 is more for like the liberal arts humanities group. If you're in STEM, you're getting more than $2,000. So these are the minimums. So some programs actually do pay more than per month. And that's if you're doing 20 hours a week. So 20 hours a week is the full-time equivalent that we have. And then there's a 10-hour, 5-hour, also 15 hours. And then, so what will happen if you go into a 10 hours, your benefits will get cut in half, basically. Your stipend will be in half, type of thing. And then if you're out of state, that's waived out, considered in state at that point. And then most tuition fees are covered. So actually that's going to change. In July, it's actually going to be 100% tuition will be covered by these schools. So that's something to be excited about. The only thing you have to pay for is like the 300 and something fees that are there. And then with the 20-hour a week position one, you get full health insurance paid for. That's the other nice thing about it. Questions about that? And the way you'd find these, there's a couple ways. So when you apply to grad school, your application will ask you if you want funding. Your question is like worded that way. Just always say yes, even if you're not looking for funding. Just and then, so in most cases, academic units will provide you TA or an RA position. STEM has a lot more than like the humanities because they have more money. So like if you apply in education, they might not have any of those, and then you have to go look. So you can go look on the UNR job site, and so that's one source to look for, or you can just go around and ask departments, see if they have any available. Sometimes what also happens is that another academic department might have open ones, and then if you are qualified, like if you know something about whatever they're trying to teach or whatever, then you could potentially apply for that one too as well. And that happen. Students that are not doing biology, but they're teaching chemistry in some other department. The last thing I was going to talk about is our grad fit program. Basically, what the grad fit program is, this is what I'm just talking, but over 5 days. It gives you a crash course of everything that you would need to know before you apply to grad school. You go through a bunch of workshops about the GRE, writing a personal statement, the application itself, more focus on what types of funding is available. And then you also get to meet grad students and faculty members. Ideally, you meet faculty members and grad students that are in the areas that you're interested in applying to. Who knows, you might find an advisor there if you do that. So this is a program that we do typically at the week before Memorial Weekend. That's at the end of May. We already closed the application for this coming May, but we'll open it again in the fall for the next year. We try to take up to 50 students. And it's free. We do feed you, house you if you need a dorm for the period of the program. And then we cover the other costs like transportation when we go to Tahoe. That's where I don't have the picture in there. But there is a Tahoe day, so typically, as long as weather is permitting. I think we've only had to cancel that one. I like to throw that one in there. That's what I did.
True. Yeah.
And yeah, there's my contact info. Probably the easiest way would be email. Any questions? I think what are the other questions that you asked me to cover, but I don't know if I covered.
You can go to the beginning.
Beginning time? I'm forgetting something too. This one?
Next. Yeah. Stay on here for a while. I think I had a question.
Because you're thinking about doctoral program, right?
I don't think, I think it's a professional program.
Oh, okay.
PA school or med school, those
Yeah.
are professional.
Yeah, PA is technically under the med school. It's a weird program, where it's situated.
Have you ever heard of med school?
Not here, but I know what
Yeah.
you want to be an anesthesiologist.
No, it wouldn't be like an MD or DO anesthesiologist, but I've just heard talk about like across the country, there's these anesthesia programs and they're counted as grad schools. But Nevada doesn't have one.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention too is like deadlines in regards to graduate programs. So here at our campus, it varies. Like each program has their own deadline that they set. Some are early December. We even have ones that deadlines are in November. And then they go all the way up until like July. It just depends on what program you're applying to. You want to look at the deadline for that.
Like the review cycle is like a whole year, right? They review.
No, so it's actually quicker. No, a year that'd be forever. That'd be a nightmare. No, it depends. So usually we'll tell students, usually the longest that I've heard a student had to wait for was 2 months.
For response?
Yeah. Well, because usually when you're applying to grad school, like if you're applying in the, like, let's say you're going to apply, you want to start fall of 2024. You would start applying fall of 23. And then depending on the deadline for it, you're going to need to know before that so that we can start taking your courses. The latest ones that we have are like the July ones. That's typically education. They're a weird bunch in regards to that, just because they take in students a lot later. And so, like, well, for example, we have ones that are done in February. The deadlines are in February. And so those students will hear by like March if they've been admitted or not. Because the thing is, ultimately the goal is that they want to let students know before April 15th. April 15th is like a national decision day, I guess you would say. And so
Isn't there like a quirky reason for that? I heard there was like a.
yeah, and so April 15th is usually the day that we want to know by, just so that way you can provide funding and things like that in those situations. But that's when usually a lot of students will, or a lot of programs will send out their notifications if their deadlines are before that 15th. Yeah, so the deadlines are all over the place. It's just, and then some will only accept in the fall, while some will accept fall and spring. We also have one that accepts in the summer. That was, but there's some that if you miss fall deadline, you're gonna have to wait till next fall. They only do fall cohorts. They don't do spring. And then the other thing to mention too is that we do have programs. Oh, that was one thing I was going to say. The other myth, I guess, is that whether or not your undergrad has to match your graduate degree. It doesn't have to match that. You look completely different. So like if you went and did business as undergrad, but you want for your master's, you want to go into education, they'll do that. Oh, sorry, you did
Yeah, so I
say,
did.
or vice versa, yeah.
So to get into like a different specialty than you did in undergrad, you have to get a bunch of like internships and jobs and experience to apply.
Not necessarily. The thing that might happen if you're going into a field that you did not do as an undergrad, you might have to take prerequisites. Like for example, like, let's say you started in education and wanted to go into business. I think there's some sort of stats class that you have to take before you can apply type of thing. So that would be one example. You would want to talk to the program directors. So that's the other thing to mention in regards to our grad school. Each program is different, like I've been saying. Each program has their own grad program director. So that's usually a faculty member in that program, and they're the ones that oversee the program at the grad level. That person can be the same one that oversees the master's and PhD, or sometimes it could be different people. But they are the ones you always want to ask like specific questions about the program. So like, what is it that you're looking for in an application? We can tell you the general idea of what they're looking for, but they're the more specific ones. And like I said, they're the ones reviewing your application. So you want to ask them like, what requisites do I need? Like you just show them your transcript, they're like, you didn't do that, you do this question. That's what could happen. And then the other thing, the one benefit though that does help if you have the same undergrad as grad, is you might be able to accelerate that grad program quicker. So like the MBA program lets you accelerate, you do it in 2 years instead of 3. Social work lets you do it in 1 year. You have that undergrad already. That's another way of trying to knock out grad school so they can do it in 5 years, undergrad and grad. That type of thing is there.
Wasn't that something that so since I did undergrad in business and decided to go into education, one of the recommendations that I was told by my mentors and faculty advisors was when you're thinking about literature love to rec, think about who specifically you want to ask about. So going back to like Matt's point about that, I decided, because of that, I decided to ask my mentor who was, doing, in higher education, student activities, like campus life sorts of. And I also asked the dean of students for the university because he was in that field specifically. And luckily enough, he actually knew folks in the graduate program that I was applying to. So it's going to be based on if there's like no like direct equivalent to, both programs, it's going to come down to who the letters are coming from.
And you do want people that know you. You don't want someone just to write you like a generic letter. We always make sure that you try to these people leave their them enough. But it's more about your work ethics, what they're looking for in these letters of recommendation. Like one of mine was the dean of the grad school.
And yeah, I think my third one was, I think it was like one of the professors I had for at least like 2 courses during undergrad, just because like they got to know me. Like, oh.
For letters of rec, you have, like, would it be a good idea to have 2 people speak about like the same thing that you did? Like they know you for the same thing or no?
Just the same project.
Yeah.
I'd probably try to make it more broad, like diverse in that regard, like try to get more angles about you. So if there again,
But would it hurt?
I don't think it would hurt, but I don't think it would necessarily help as much as if you get someone else who can talk about something different about you. That makes sense. As long as they're not writing the exact same letter. You want them to write that. You want them to like just change the names in the letter.
Yeah, it's something back to, think about, obviously, who can speak more like, on your academic side. So, professor, faculty member, think about who can talk more about like, your work ethic, your performance. Then maybe someone who may have, has gotten to know you also on a more like personal.
Yeah, because so I applied to 2 different programs and different grad ones here. And I applied. I changed one of the faculty recommendations on each one. So like, because one program I applied to was social psychology. And I was thinking I was going to do research related to juvenile detention. And I was working at juvenile detention. So I had the supervisor from that one write a letter there. And then the other one was education that I applied to. And that one I ended up, I did for that one instead, but that one was more education related. The other 2 were kind of more broad enough that were just more there for academic use. But I switched out the other ones for that reason. I was thinking that perspective of that juvenile piece would help. Question?
So are there master's degrees where there is no research at all?
Yeah, that would be like more of the non-thesis option. Like For example, you mainly be doing sort of research project. You'd be doing some sort of project, but what might happen is in some of these classes, there probably is gonna be like some sort of research you would have to do. Maybe like a research project or group project, you might have to do that still. But you're not like having to like go and like do like a whole like study on it.
Yeah, that might be like maybe like a course, like an assessment or something, and then like that's like a couple research projects here and there, but like your final thing, it may not be a thesis, it may be just doing some sort of like presentation, like some sort of like final project to say, all right, based on your like 2-3 years, of your like, time of grad school, what is something that's, that you learned about and what you can like apply to the real world.
Yeah, because I like my master's, I did mine in education, but mine didn't have a thesis option, and so I ended up we had to do an internship, and then at the end of the internship, we had to present what we did. That was kind of my final project. The other thing I forgot to mention is that we have we have a few doctoral programs that are not PhDs. And those are not as research focused. Like for example, the College of Ed has an EDD, so it's doctorate in education. That one's less credits than the PhD one, but it's still, you still have to do a dissertation, but the focus of that is more practitioner based. So the idea is that you're gonna implement this, if you're not just doing it for the research aspect. That's another program that's there in the College of Ed. The nursing programs have their own doctoral ones too, that aren't technically considered PhDs and those types of regards.
I know you said like there's differences in grants for master's versus PhD. Do PhDs pay out of pocket at all?
They will. I mean, it depends on what type of funding they have. So one thing to keep in mind too is like, I talked about these graduate assistantships. What you can still get on these are the scholarships and grants. So like, for example, when I went through my PhD and my master's, I was on a graduate assistant too. But I got the access grant through here at UNR. So most of the time I didn't even have to pay. I just got money back. The only ones I said you can't double down on is you can't do a GA and a fellowship. It puts you over like the educational costs, your financial aid package. So you can't do that, but you can still apply for scholarships and grants and still receive them if you're on an assistantship. The other benefit to the assistantship is full-time. So full-time for a grad student is 9 credits generally. If you're on an assistantship, it's 6 credits. However, you only want to do that if, let's say you get a scholarship or grant from an external source. They might require you to be full-time, and so that full-time would be 9 credits. So you might have to take 9 in those situations. But in most cases, if you're on a GA position, you can take 6 credits and you can do it full-time. Doesn't sound like a lot of credits in comparison to undergrad, but it's a lot of work. Yes, I mean, you can still get scholarships and grants. They're out there, you just have to apply for them, and the university has a couple. And then some departments on campus have their own for their specific students. So that's another thing you can look into as well. And your field that you're going into. Any other questions? None of you have a question?
I've learned a lot last 45
You were
minutes.
taking notes, right?
Yeah, I was taking notes. Yeah.
Are you typing? You touch it.
No, it's not.
I like looking over the shoulder and say, let's time no. These guys.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not as very.
Thank you, Matthew,
Yeah,
for
it's
sharing.
A little quicker.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know, you get random situations where people ask you various questions. We can just talk about the general aspect, but it always comes down to each program. Programs different. Like we'll get questions regarding like acceptance rates for each program. And then some programs are very competitive, while some will accept basically all their students. Education will tend to accept more students, but they just don't provide funding as much. Like, that's the other benefits of like some programs is that they'll only accept the number that they can for funding purposes. Because they want to be able to give all their students funding. Usually when they say they want to give you funding, it's graduate assistantship. In most cases. Well, that's the benefit, like engineering will do something like that.
Screen share.
Okay.
Yeah. And then should pop up a little bit.
Okay, I was so confused. Thank you. All right,